Our goal in Photonic is to have a minimum of 40,000 logical qubits in service running applications in 2030. By in service, what I mean is they meet the service level agreement. You're running applications on them every second, every minute, every hour, up 24/7, 365 days a year.
The International Year of Quantum is now in the books, and the industry seems to be driving towards an amazing 2026. To capture this momentum, we invited back one of the companies DARPA chose to help build a fault-tolerant future. We'll discuss that initiative, recap what we learned in 2025, and look ahead to what may be a pivotal year towards achieving practical advantage in this episode of the Post-Quantum World. I'm your host, Konstantinos Karagiannis. I lead quantum computing services at Protiviti, where we're helping companies prepare for the benefits and threats of this exploding field. I hope you'll join each episode as we explore the technology and business impacts of this post-quantum era. Our guest today is the CEO of Photonic, Paul Terry. Welcome to the show.
Hi, great to be here.
Yeah, thanks for coming. We're going to have a little fun today. We're going to sort of recap 2025, the International Year of Quantum, as it's been called. And we'll do a little bit of looking ahead to what 2026 might bring. So I think it's a fun inflection point here to base this conversation off of. First off, I want to congratulate you guys for being selected for the DARPA Quantum Benchmarking Initiative Stage B. And that's a whole lot of words. So just in case some of the listeners don't know what that is, maybe you could just give a little quick elevator pitch or description about what that QBI actually is.
So the Americans have a DARPA program, which they started actually several years ago. They had a provisional DARPA program, which ran for 2 years, in lieu of the actual DARPA main program, which started in 2025. So I think they selected about 18 or 19 companies for what they call DARPA Stage A, which was the beginning of 2025. They have now announced a selection of 11 companies to go to DARPA Stage B, and eventually there will be a selection to go to DARPA Stage C. I think that DARPA is a reflection of government, especially the US government, trying to accelerate the practical commercialization of a quantum computer. So what they are interested in is give us a plan and a mechanism and a reason to believe that quantum computers are coming fast and furious, they're coming now, and let us help you figure out how to get there. So several companies, of course, applied to the DARPA programs. We got selected for DARPA A and now the DARPA B. So DARPA A ended around about the end of November. A very long report, I think it was 250 pages. And with that 250-page report, they made a selection to DARPA B. So to my knowledge, there are 11 companies in DARPA B. And the goal now is to create an R&D plan for a universal quantum computer to be available, in DARPA's words, at 2033 or earlier. Notice the or earlier. So I think the big surprise in the DARPA program is quite how many companies have a practical plan to deliver a quantum computer. Several years ago, people would go, well, it's coming at some point, at some time, in some universe. Now, DARPA gives people the expectation that it's coming sooner rather than later. So now the race is on. So under no illusion, DARPA has created a race. So we have 10 other companies competing with us, and credit to them. Some of the smartest people in the world are now preparing, generating the plans to generate universal quantum computers, which will be deployed on or before 2033.
Okay. And first of all, if you all win, we all win. So I hope all of the companies do well. Truly. I mean, we can use as many of these machines as possible. So what specific milestones does Photonic need to prove to DARPA over the next, let's say, year or so that will confirm your utility scale dreams are achievable by 2033?
I think that, and the world probably believes that we need, first of all, to have a quantum bit, a qubit that's good, stable, manufacturable, high fidelities, etc. And for many, many years, that was the action. As you know, in quantum, we we searched and we know all the theory of quantum before we actually even made a qubit. It wasn't until the year 2000 that the practical physicists started even engaging in the practical implementation of qubits. So that journey was 20 years, arguably. As late as 2018, 2019, computers were made with only 54 qubits, for example, in a computer. So now what's happened is that several modalities no longer have 54 qubits; they have 100 or 200 or 300 physical qubits. So now the idea that you can make a qubit has now receded. And now the question is making a practical qubit, one that can run applications. So the DARPA program is all about the Quantum Benchmarking Initiative. The clue is in the name, which is however you make it, whatever it looks like, make it fit for purpose. Make it run applications that are useful to the world. That's what the world is looking for. So the big move, I would say, in the last 2 years is the end of 24 with the end of noisy qubits. This is where no longer, if you have just a noisy qubit, were you competitive. 2025, this year, was the year of what I call phase 2, which is the small number of logical qubits. 26 and beyond is a large number of logical qubits. That's the first idea, which is give us technologies that can actually scale and create large numbers of logical qubits. That's the first idea. The second idea, and the listeners may not know this, is that not all logical qubits are made the same. And so the technical term is what's your error correction rate, whatever that means, on your logical qubit. So let me make it easy. An error correction rate of 10 to the minus 4, whatever that means, we call those bronze qubits. An error rate of 10 to the minus 8 is silver qubits, and 10 to the minus 12 is gold qubits. So we think of logical qubits in the bronze, silver, and gold category. To be clear, today we are in the sub-bronze category. We have logical qubits that don't have very good logical error rates. So DARPA is keen on 2 dimensions. One is increasing the logical qubits and increasing the quality of logical qubits. So both DARPA and, in fact, people like the UK government, the European government, the Canadian government are interested in gold plus grade logical qubits in 2030. So the race is on for a large number of logical qubits at gold standard in 2030, and that's exactly what we're doing. So to answer your question, what DARPA is looking for is all the roadmap items along the way to say that you can scale your logical qubit and get to that quality performance.
Nice. So that really makes it clear for the listeners. I guess if we're in the sub-bronze area, right now we're in the someone was out partying a little late last night, and that's the level of logic they're displaying in the morning. That's kind of where we are. It's a little fuzzy still. Yeah, they're not quite there. So a lot of the headlines in 2025, like Google's Willow, they focused heavily on gate-based error correction on a single processor. Photonic has always doubled down on entanglement-first distributed architecture. And Photonic's been on the show before. One of your colleagues was on. And so how does your selection for stage B validate that distributed approach over the monolithic processor approach we've seen?
Well, so my background is 20 years of networking and telecoms and a decade of supercomputing. So my background is all about scale, and we always scale via networks. Humans are very good at two types of scaling. One, scaling on chips. When we make transistors on a chip, I started my career with a couple of thousand transistors on a chip, and now we're up to 52 billion transistors on a chip. And then we had networks, and when I started, there were no networks, and now we have the internet. So both of those dimensions allow you to scale. That's the first idea. The second idea is that the currency of quantum computing is entanglement. So if you don't have superposition, you don't have a qubit. And so let's assume that you have superposition, so you have a qubit. So all modalities have qubits. But the question is, and the one that distinguishes all the modalities, is how do you, one, generate entanglement, and secondly, how do you consume entanglement? Okay, so the consumption of entanglement is a euphemism for running a quantum program. A quantum program is basically consuming entanglement, whatever that is.
Mm-hmm.
So for that 20 years, people have created entanglements using proximity. So if you get 2 quantum objects and you make them very close together, you can get them to entangle with each other. If you physically have them apart and you move them physically together, you can create entanglement. And once you create the entanglement, you can then, a feature of quantum is you can separate them and still have entanglement. So proximity has been the way that we have for 2 decades created entanglement. The entanglement-first architecture that Steph Simmons pioneered and was to have two quantum objects entangle themselves without proximity. So they don't live necessarily on the same chip, in the same room, in the same city, in the same country. How can you do that? And you can do that by using photons to carry, if you like, the entanglement signal between the two, in our case, spin qubits. So this idea is a radical idea. It's a very strange idea. It's an idea that won the Nobel Prize for Physics in 2022. The idea that, because for a long time people didn't believe this was possible, and the experiments to demonstrate this were done in the 80s actually. And so we did it commercially in 2022, the same year the Nobel Prize was awarded, not to us, by the way, but to academics that had demonstrated this. So now we have a situation where you can create entanglement with two objects that have never met each other. Now, the interesting implication of that, there are two implications. The first one is that those two objects are no longer subject to quantum noise. In other words, because they're not making them next to each other, they're more manufacturable. If you can get those photons to be telecom-grade photons, which is what we do, you can actually you can use the regular networks or data centers to actually transmit the entanglement information, which we do routinely, which means you have an arbitrary scale. So your computer architecture is a field of connected qubits that all interact via photons. The second idea, which is something that people haven't quite figured out yet, and this comes from my days of supercomputing, is that all entanglement can occur in pairs, all in the same clock cycle, which means it's a massively parallel computer. And so if you think about the performance of the computer, coming back to what DARPA wants, which is a QBI program, tell me how fast this computer is working. Like a GPU, if you can create entanglement, which is your currency, all in the same clock cycle, all at the same time, and you're consuming it, what you're doing here is using networking to create an arbitrary fast machine. And that is why we started with entanglement, and we work backwards from entanglement, which is why we call it entanglement-first. We work backwards from entanglement, and what do we have to do to make a networkable quantum computer, which oddly is also the same as a quantum network. And so they're basically one and the same things. In the old days, in the 80s, we used to say that the network is the computer is the network. It's becoming true again in the world of quantum.
Yeah, there's a lot going on with networking, and we're going to get to some of that. And my next question, you kind of half answered some of it. So I just point out, like this year we saw some new modalities. I can't believe it's almost been a year since we saw Microsoft's topological qubit, that news, and some other things. So it sounds like you still believe firmly in silicon T centers, your spin photon qubits, because of the more network scaling capabilities. How does that work with existing telecom infrastructure?
So yeah, the definition of scale, so I spent my career actually in scale.
Hmm.
And this is something that people don't really understand. If you want to scale something, what you're trying to do is if you make it ever bigger, and the marginal cost of adding one more thing needs to be zero. So what that means is practically, if the marginal cost of adding one more thing is the same as the last, or more than the last, you can get big things, but they don't scale.
Hmm.
Okay, so think about the internet. The marginal cost of adding a router to the internet to try to have more connectivity is basically nothing.
Hmm.
So the internet scales. Okay, think of transistors and computers. The marginal cost of adding a transistor to a microprocessor is basically nothing, which is why we see transistors doubling every 18 months. The Moore's law is the scaling law that we've actually benefited from for the last 40 years. So one thing we were keen on in our modality is benefiting from both of those scale mechanisms. One, the scale of silicon, which constantly allows us to put more on a chip,
Hmm.
and the scale of a network, which allows us to put more things connected together. So all of our engineering is about those two scales. And so anybody competing with us has to solve the scalability in both of those dimensions. And it's not just making them bigger, it's also in the idea that these things have to be stable. So as an example, one mistake people make is if you make a box and you put a power supply in it, or if the power supply fails, the box fails. So what do? You put two power supplies in the box, you have redundancy. Yeah, that's fine, but now you have a new modality of failure. Both power supplies have to be the same. So you put a third power supply in the box, but then you have cascade failures. And so you end up in dealing with redundancy, you end up with a problem of scale. So scale can manifest itself in that. If instead you do what the cloud computing people have done and you submit your job to the cloud and it executes on whatever computer wherever, then you can have the computers themselves to be scalable. And so that's another thing we do. So one thing that I try to get through to the company is everything we do is about service level agreements. Ultimately, we're going to be putting logical qubits in service for people to run on. And people will want to have these things up 24/7, 365 days a year, executing their programs, which are programs that they couldn't execute using a supercomputer, which I have a lot of experience in. So a big part of the modalities that you have need to scale. Lots of them, and 80% of them, have a scalability mechanism on a chip or in a box. Few of them have scalability beyond the boxes. And so you saw in 2025 the rise of two things. One is the idea that having a quantum computer was going to require you to interconnect boxes. And the second one is the rise of error correction, which I think we'll get onto in a couple of questions' time. And so we solved both of those at the same time, actually. And that's what we set out to do.
Yeah. Since we talked so much about the connectivity thing, IBM and Cisco made the announcement that they're going to work together for networking quantum computers.
Right.
IonQ, of course, has been on an acquiring frenzy. They believe very much in this idea of connecting their machines together to get to scale. So you should probably feel vindicated, I guess. It's that same approach that you've been working on. So with all that coming to pass, let's talk like short term and long term. So for 2026, what would you expect your commercial roadmap would look like before we extrapolate too far out with qubits and things? What kinds of maybe algorithms do you see running this year on your hardware?
It's a good question. Let me just return briefly to the last statement you made. Is it's not easy. It's probably one of the most difficult engineering challenges you have
Hmm.
to link two quantum computers together. And the reason for that is if you have a modality, you have to change modalities
Yes.
to link them together, then you're inventing an interface that converts one modality from A to B.
Hmm.
And that turns out to be very difficult because there's a no cloning law in quantum.
Hmm.
And so the only way to do that is to create entanglement and create it again. So you have to chain entanglement to do that, which is essentially almost like inventing a quantum repeater, okay, to do that, which people have been trying to do for 20 years. So the idea that you can join a quantum computer together with a NIC card is naive at best. And so what you really want to do is have a modality that's native to the interconnect that you have. And that's what Steph's breakthrough in 2018 was, is I have a quantum modality that's native to telecom networks.
Hmm.
And so it is not at all straightforward to interconnect two quantum computers together, not at all straightforward. And in fact, many will have to go back and reinvent their modalities to do that. And that's something you have to kind of figure out. We don't, but people will. It's not easy. And even if you can do it, your efficiency is very low typically. And most transducers and so forth, or transduction mechanisms, have efficiencies in the 2 or 3%. And so it becomes a very difficult, and it's the elephant in the room for most technologies. Let's go back to the roadmap question. So one thing I'd say in 2025, the big breakthrough or the big recognition in 2025 was error correction. So we've been working on it for 2 or 3 years, and we do error correction on the basis of networking. If you are doing error correction on the basis of proximity, then surface codes are very, very good. And we have 25 years of surface code research. A lot of people, many, many PhDs invented on surface codes, and they are very good, scientifically very excellent. But if you relax the constraint of proximity, I don't need proximity anymore, Then you can move from surface codes to LDPC codes. So LDPC codes, just for the viewers here, are low density parity codes. They have the same family as erasure codes, which is how RAID 6 works on your hard drives, for example. It's also how 5G wireless works. 5G wireless only works because of LDPC codes. Everybody has an LDPC code decoder in their phones, actually, to do the signal to noise in your to do error correction on your phones. You can make that quantum. And so we spent 2.5 years or so figuring it out, and we spent almost all of last year defending the IP, patenting the IP, and then in February, March this year, we released to the world quantum LDPC codes. And the idea that you no longer need 1 to 10,000 physical qubits to make a logical qubit. You can get away with 10 to 50 to 1. So you reduce the physical requirements of your quantum computers dramatically and increase the utilization of your physical mechanisms. So that error correction, so now what you've seen in industry 25 is everybody moving to LDPC codes, right? So everybody's saying that we will have LDPC codes now, okay, which is going to be interesting to see how they actually do that and overcome the patents that we've got with. But this is what people are doing. So now, as we go into 2026, the race is on to have more logical qubits at greater error correction rates, which is a function of your code, which means the race is on to gold qubits, essentially. And that's the rate that everybody's on. There's no question there's a foot race. Our goal in Photonic is to have a minimum of 40,000 logical qubits in service running applications in 2030. Okay, that's
By what year?
2030
2030, you want to have 40,000 logical qubits?
in service.
Wow.
And by in service, what I mean is they meet a service level agreement.
hmm
You're running applications on them every second, every minute, every hour, every so forth. They're up 24/7. They're up 365 days a year. People aren't questioning the fact that logical qubits of quantum is real. You don't see the quantum computer because it's provided as a service on the network.
hmm
All quantum computers will actually be hybrid computers, actually. You'll probably use a web interface
Yeah, of course.
to interact with them and so forth. And so there'll be a cloud service. Interestingly, anybody buying a quantum computer today, that quantum computer is going to be obsolete in 12 months because the pace of innovation is going so fast now. Nobody now is saying, will a quantum computer be real? It's a question of when, how many, and when can I use it? That's the question on the table now. And that's been the big change in 2025. In the end of 2024, which was the end of NISC, it was, can I have any sort of practical realization of utility from a NISC-based machine?
hmm
I think IBM, to their credit, were the only real company to actually generate revenue, real revenue, out of NISC-based noisy qubits. And that was really educating people on what the art of the possible in quantum. Going forwards, nobody's in any doubt anymore. Even the naysayers, there's no doubt. The only question is just 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. It's definitely less than 5 years. It's probably more than 18 months. Somewhere in that area is going to be when these things land, and they'll land quickly. And the speed at which you deploy 40,000 logical qubits will be a function of your ability to scale, not your ability to make a new generation of computer.
hmm
Again, this is about networking. If I've got, pick a number, 100 logical qubits in this computer, and I've got another one, and you can wire them together, you now have 200 logical qubits, etc. And so the question now is not how many logical qubits can you put out, it is almost driving down the cost per logical qubit as you go forward to put more logical qubits in service, which customers don't really see, frankly, as you get on.
So how soon would we have gold logical qubits then with photonic? And I'm just trying to 40,000 logical gold qubits by 2030 is awesome. I mean, that's you can pretty much solve any problem on Earth you want to solve if it's, capable of being solved.
Well, we'll have
It's a lot.
the gold qubit by 2030. We will.
So what do the next 2 years look like? Like how soon can someone use 100 logical qubits or 1,400 logical qubits? There's a reason for that second number.
So practical applications. So let's go here for a second. So practical applications, require between 100 logical qubits and 2,000 logical qubits.
Mhm.
There are applications below 100 logical qubits, and those are kind of really teaching things. There are applications above 2,000 logical qubits, which are more like national security type thing. Firstly, there's 80% of what we do, what we can do, is in the 100 to 2,000 logical qubits range. That's the first idea. Second idea is that as these logical qubits are coming online, a lot of progress is being made by reducing the number of logical qubits you need to run a particular algorithm or particular application. And so it used to be thought that Shor's algorithm would be 10,000 logical qubits. That has come down dramatically. I think Google has published some papers recently saying, "Hey, we can do these things with far fewer logical qubits than we ever imagined."
Yes.
That's a natural force caused by the fact that logical qubits are on the near horizon now. So people are spending time, and a lot of very smart people are going to optimize. And if you think about classical computing, we've had 40 or 50 years of constantly optimizing algorithms to use fewer resources, and that will continue going forward. In the 100 to 500 logical qubit realm are your AIs and your LLMs, oddly. So they are the ones that need fewer logical qubits than you might imagine. So we're going to see in the next 2.5, 3 years, the 100, 200, 300 logical qubits being applied to LLMs, let's say. When you get to 1,000 logical qubits, you no longer need to have a heuristic to do, let's say, chemistry. You can do it natively, and you can compute answers rather than guess them. And so at about 1,000 logical qubits, you unlock the world of chemistry.
Mhm.
Once you get to about 1,800 logical qubits, you unlock the world of finance. So hedge fund management and all this type of thing, portfolio management. So for us, it's not really about us, Photonic. It's not really about how many logical qubits we put in service. What we are now working on is friends and partners and strategics who have had access to our systems to date, starting to think about practical, real applications on the computers that we are going to generate. And we'll have journey customers in the next 2 years, and then we'll have public consumption by 2030.
So I'm going to skip around a little bit on some concepts because some of the answers you gave. In 2025, hybrid became a little bit more of like a buzzword. The NVIDIA, quantum integrations that we saw, et cetera. So has the industry finally started leaning towards some kind of standard on how classical and quantum will talk to each other? Or do you still think that that's a bit of a mess?
They have not. They have not. Now, I spent a lot of my career in supercomputing and parallel processing and so forth. And so various people have various mechanisms. The industry is starting to understand, and it's fairly new, so your viewers will hear it here, that parallel computing and quantum computing are synonymous, actually. Every quantum computer going forward will be a parallel computer. And so how you divide your problems into a parallel nature, how they communicate with each other, is quite well known in, let's say, the GPU farms. This is where CUDA comes from, for example. But it is virtually unknown in quantum. And so we're going to see a world now of parallel architectures hitting the quantum computers. The idea of running a quantum computer sequentially, writing a circuit sequentially, is really quite naive. What you're going to have is a purely parallel task going on to the quantum computers. Okay, so that's relatively new, and people don't talk about it because people will want speed and performance, and that's how you get speed and performance. Back to the fact that you can consume entanglement and you can produce it in parallel, which is exactly how the modern supercomputers work. All computers will be hybrid in so much as quantum computers will never drive a web interface. I mean, and neither do you want them to. So, and there may also be tasks, especially big database type tasks that are better than classic. So quantum computers are not big databases; they're more compute engines. So think of all the old schoolers here, think of quantum computers more like floating point units almost, sort of big, heavy industrial compute elements, essentially, that can compute everything at an incredible speed. They're not really data storage mechanisms. Okay, so they will be hybrid. Data will flow backwards and forwards. Quantum computer will take jobs, execute jobs, and give results back. And a lot of the user interfaces will be done by a traditional cloud, I would think, and people will consume it from their desktop. One of the mantras at Photonic is that I'm not interested in selling 100 quantum computers to the people who can afford them. I'm interested in providing quantum services to the global 10,000 that need them. And if we've learned anything from cloud computing, it is to have access to that at that degree of compute is going to revolutionize many industries that otherwise wouldn't be able to afford a quantum computer per se. And then that's going to be really, it's very important to us. Uh, and it's very important all the way up and down the stack. It's important that people learning quantum computing at school, that the universities using it, the companies are actually deploying it. These things are what we're going to see in 5 years.
So there was way more than $1 billion that flowed into the quantum industry in 2025. So are VCs now going to be asking different questions as we enter the new year? You were mentioning about some of the initial use cases in, let's say, the 100 logical qubit range, machine learning or AI. That's got to be a bit of a sizzle as far as a lure for a VC, right? AI is basically magic. Sprinkle that into a conversation and you win. So what do you think is going to happen there? What kind of conversations are VCs going to be having to invest in, let's say, this year, next year, with the looming logical qubit numbers that we'd need to do that?
Yeah, it's an interesting point. So first of all, quantum has become very real for a lot of people. A lot of as you notice, the G7 announced quantum is a major initiative alongside AI.
Hmm.
You'll notice the Canadian government, we're in Canada, have announced quantum as a major initiative. The US has DARPA as quite an initiative. The UK has now putting real money behind DARPA as an initiative around quantum as an initiative. So all the G7 countries are moving quite fast now into quantum. So again, back to the point, it's not an if, it's a when.
Hmm.
That's the first point. People are still kind of say, well, there's a chicken and egg. Do you have an application for a computer or a computer for an application? And so a lot of the conversations one has is to demonstrate to people that, hey, quantum is becoming real. And so you need to start thinking about the applications. We in Photonic are now engaged with many strategics in the worlds of chemistry and finance, for example, on getting them ahead of the game so they have applications to run when the quantum computers come. And so this is a very keen thing. To the VCs, the VCs are seeing, or the investors. So there's two types of investors here. There's the the institutional investors, the VCs and the growth funds. And the growth funds are starting to play with this going, hey, I see a winner emerging. I doubt there'll be any new modality. They can come from anywhere, but there will be no new modalities. So the modalities we see, which are supercon, ion traps, spin qubits, which is what we are, or neutral atoms, the winners will come from those modalities. The argument is, will we have one winner or will we have multiple winners? This is the question they have. The opportunity on the application side in quantum is starting to attract the attention of the investors in the private equity kind of range. Of course, what we've seen in 2025 is the public markets looking at any public quantum stocks and saying, hey, if we missed AI, we shouldn't miss quantum. And so you're seeing valuations jump from hundreds of millions in 24 to tens of billions in 25 as the public markets are starting to invest in the now public quantum stocks. So you'll see a lot of quantum stocks wanting to go public to take advantage of maybe the money-raising opportunities in quantum. It takes a fair amount of money to actually raise to run a quantum company in the short term. It's a capital-intensive operation. So you're seeing those two dynamics play out as you're seeing more companies SPAC, for example, in the public markets as an alternative, frankly, to private equity. So now two dimensions going there. It remains to be seen. We are a private company and we're very well funded as a private company, so we don't see the need to go public. But essentially, one has to acknowledge that there are two dimensions.
Yeah, definitely. And now I wonder about the fear component. Fear does drive technology, right? Like we've seen it over and over again. We've seen it with AI. It's like we have to get there first, so that spurred that. The first money ever spent on quantum was let's build a encryption cracking machine. That's really what it was, and we're sort of right back there again. IonQ, their CEO, said he expects to crack encryption in 10 quarters, not 10 years. That's pretty impressive. Your timelines are not really that far off from what I'm hearing. They're very similar.
They're not, no.
So yeah, so while NIST is saying 2035, you and many others seem to be saying 2030 or sooner. Because especially that Gidney paper from Google, right? That only calls for 1,399 logical qubits. That's it, running for 5 days. So we're really knocking on the door where crack encryption might be one of the first use cases that actually, is seen as a success. It's one of the first. So do you then feel the need to advise CISOs or companies about the threat too while you're building towards this future?
Yeah, so I think security is a continuum, not a thing.
Hmm.
It's not an absolute. And so I don't think people are going to be using quantum computers to crack your credit card numbers. I think, yeah. So in a lot of the quantum economy, if you will, the replacement of RSA is a very valid thing to do. So post-quantum cryptography to replace RSA is something that has become a national priority. The US has made it a priority for federal government.
Hmm.
Canadians do the same thing here. My daughter's school my daughter's school is now post-cryptographic safe in Canada, right? So just to give you
That's amazing.
so so it's possible. The NIST guys publish algorithms to make you post-cryptography safe. I think we have had 40 plus years of RSA safety. The world has now learned that you can now have to be fairly nimble because this RSA got built into kind of everything that we do and everything that we are. And so most of the public's reaction is to the lack of safety of RSA. Several browsers now are post-cryptographic safe already. So I'm not too worried about the e-commerce, and smart people will actually improve algorithms to make it actually very difficult. You have to make it secure. You have to make it very difficult to crack for the kind of last mile e-commerce stuff. Having said that, there is a market to say, hey, point-to-point security for things that matter a lot is no longer secure. And I think that's true. So interbank lending, stuff like that, in 10 months or 10 quarters, I should say, they won't be safe. Firewall passcodes won't be safe. So the good news is there's an answer to that, and it is quantum cryptography. So the world thinks that is QKD, which is what it's been for the last while, which is a point-to-point thing, and we already have products in the world that can do that. There will be a time when we don't need point-to-point. We can actually have point-to-hub and quantum repeaters, which is technology that our technology can do, and I'm assuming others may be able to do it as well, which will allow us to actually create completely safe point-to-point links. So I turn it around and say that if the market demands it, the technology will now allow it. It's just a cost thing, and that's just a price performance thing in the market to make data centers or interbank lending or national security networks completely quantum secure. Okay, so it's no longer not a problem. So it's not really a technical problem. I don't lose sleep over it. It's just how much pain will people suffer before they decide to actually spend the money to do it? But it will be a lot of money that needs to be spent ultimately to make all these things safe.
Yeah, and of course with the repeater example, that's fine until you get to wireless, and then you better have PQC ciphers in place because obviously,
Yeah, right.
yeah, you
Yeah.
can't be catching photons with your laptop running around.
That's right.
Um,
And it actually goes beyond just encrypting the links, right? It goes on to identity management.
mhm.
So, for example, identity management is one of the big issues in QKD. And oddly, using quantum entanglement, you can actually sort of solve identity management. So that's a whole new world that people have never even heard of. You can also incidentally do blind computing
Yep.
using quantum entanglement. So there's now areas that we're going to uncover that actually makes the world a much safer place. It's just going to cost money. And so I actually think the world's going to a safer place, even though the threat is there.
Yeah, we have an episode coming on fully homomorphic encryption and that kind of thing, and how that'll work in a post quantum way, of course. So I appreciate all your insights. You gave some answers in ways that I don't think our listeners have heard before, which I'm excited about. Even just classifying the qubits as if they were Olympic gold medals. That's terrific. So before we wrap up, I'd love You can give two, but I'd love at least your one personal moonshot prediction for 2026. Big milestone, technical, commercial, something maybe the industry might not be expecting that you think will happen this year.
In 2026, I think in 2026, a couple of things are going to happen in 26. The first, actually, several things are going to happen, and they're all parallel tracks. Firstly, governments are going to lean in hard in 2026. I think you'll see all the G7 governments leaning in really hard. The DARPA B program is a 2026 program, at the end of which they'll be transitioning to DARPA C, which publicly is a $300 million program to do some prototyping for quantum. And I wouldn't be at all surprised to see governments around the world thinking about this and doing their own versions of it. I wouldn't be surprised to see that. You're going to see continued breakthroughs in the reduction of logical qubits necessary to actually run applications. We're going to see a rise in the number of applications that can be done on quantum. I think a surprising thing that you're going to find that people probably have to go is people always ask me, how do you program quantum computers? I actually think you program them with AI. So I think you're going to see an intersection of AI and quantum appear in 2026. And now, why do I have to sit down and write, the quantum equivalent of Java or whatever to actually program a quantum computer? What do I just type into a script, give me something that does this and modify it to do this and so forth and so on. So I think you'll find the front end to quantum computers changing the perception of how people use quantum computers going forwards and becoming much more human, if you like, than any computer program before has ever been. I think you may see this even appear in AI front ends to a cloud service that itself generates the mechanisms to go into quantum. I think you may even see quantum computers using their own power to optimize and rationalize their own performance. And so if you imagine, oddly, unlike a classical computer, quantum computers are reversible. And so in a classical computer, I've always learned since I was 7 years old, which was the first year I made my first computer when I was 7.
Whoa.
There's a Turing machine to go forward and never go backwards. You can't go backward, but in quantum computer, you can go backwards. Okay. So you can actually go down a path and retrace your steps in a quantum computer, and that'll yield a whole bunch of computer science that we haven't seen yet in optimizations. I think you'll see programs run on a field of quantum computers. I think you'll see less reliance on quantum hardware than you have seen in the past. I think you'll see people not asking questions about what is your single qubit fidelity. This is kind of like a rear view mirror type of thing, which is manifesting the fact that people were spending a long time making qubits, and much more, how well does your computer perform and what value added is it going to give me for my business case? And I think 2026 is the year of the quantum business case, not the year of a quantum modality per se. And I think that'll be the change. Certainly when we're speaking to people, that's what we concentrate on. Is however we do it, whatever it looks like, why do you care? Most people drive a car and don't care what's under the hood. They just care that the car gets them from A to B. And so this coming of age, if you like, this maturing of the quantum industry is long past due, frankly. And the so what and it's coming in faster than you might imagine. And the last thing I'll say is I think you'll see people realizing that the supply, even though we're going to put 40,000 logical qubits in server for 2030, I think the demand for it will be more than 40,000 logical qubits. And so I think that you're going to see people go, okay, how do I get in to even have capacity? Because the demand is going to exceed supply as people see this changing industries. And we're seeing this now. I'm constantly I was on the road for 3 months earlier this year, basically telling kind of companies and heads of state really how this is going to change the GDP and the industries and how to prepare for it. And that was really the change in business culture that's going to happen. It happened in AI. It's going to happen again in quantum, especially if they collapse or they integrate with each other. Especially when you realize that the mathematics of AI is the same as the mathematics of quantum. People don't realize that. When I went through school, the mathematics we were taught as engineers is differential calculus. The mathematics of AI and quantum is both, is all about matrices and tensors. And oddly, my PhD is in AI, just to throw that in there. So back in 1984, I did my PhD in expert systems in AI back in the day. And there was no market for it back in 84. It was taken 30, 40 years, whatever it might be,
Yeah.
without market to
You
it.
got a degree during the winter. The AI winter.
That's exactly what happened. And
Yep.
the reason for it is because then we didn't have the internet, remember? I left academia to help make the internet. And so we didn't have that. And so now you have this data, you get this convolutional correlation of all this information. Next thing you're going to see, the future AI, of course, is modeling the real world rather than the perceived world or the reported world. And the real world, a lot of the real world is chemistry, and the way you create the real world is synthetically in computers. When I was in Cray, we would do this a lot in the supercomputers. I was the CTO of Cray Canada. So as we go forward, we're going to see basically quantum computers create synthetic data to model the world of chemistry and the world around us. And that's actually one of the killer applications for quantum, is to model the world around us so that we can actually navigate it via AI.
That takes us all the way back to Feynman.
Exactly.
His initial argument for a quantum simulator.
That was his vision.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Nice and full circle. Wow. So that's great. I have to say I agree with all of it. I really do. I mean, I was excited about the idea possibly of AI helping the stack too. We have an episode coming soon on using that company that's doing that, using the stack with AI to improve programming. So on these wonderful optimistic predictions, I think 2026 will be exciting, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you all do at Photonic this year.
Oh, thank you very much for letting me rant for an hour.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming on.
That does it for this episode. Thanks to Paul Terry for joining to discuss Photonic and his predictions for 2026. And thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe to Protivity's The Post-Quantum World, and maybe leave a review to help others find us. Be sure to follow me on all socials at Constant Hacker. That's Constant with a K, Hacker. You'll find links there to what we're doing in quantum computing services at Protivity. You can also DM me questions or suggestions for what you'd like to hear on the show. For more information on our quantum services, check out Protivity.com or follow Protivity Tech on X and LinkedIn. Until next time, be kind and stay quantum curious.